provoked the beginning? Do you give them an A at least for trying to reconcile faith and reason?
I don't think they're reconcilable.
What do you mean?
Well, so let me say that differently. All efforts that have been invested by brilliant people of the past have failed at that exercise.
So the real problem here is not between faith and reason. The real problem lies between naturalism, materialism, and reason. So how is it that a person who takes a naturalistic, materialistic worldview can affirm that they are even reasoning at all? So what I mean by that is if you think about natural laws, right? So if you knew the position of the planet, say Saturn, and you had all the necessary information to calculate where Saturn would be 300 years from now, barring some strange event, you could calculate the position of Saturn 300 years from now. Why? Because Saturn is just obeying natural laws. But the atoms in your brain are also just obeying natural laws. So if the atoms in your brain are just obeying natural laws, and that's all that's giving rise to your thinking process, to what goes on in your mind, it's a lot like what Douglas Wilson has said in the past. If you take a can of Dr. Pepper and you shake it up and you open it up and it begins to fizz, what's there any difference between that Dr. Pepper fizzing and just obeying natural laws and your brain obeying natural laws? This is just what your brain does when it's at this, with these conditions and at this temperature. Your brain's just fizzing and obeying natural laws. Your atoms are just colliding with one another. What gives you the sort of volition, the aboutness, the that you can have intentionality about directing your thoughts? You aren't directing your thoughts at all. You're just obeying natural laws. The atoms in your brain are just obeying natural laws. So why should you think that you are reasoning at all? You're just doing what your brain does under these conditions, obeying natural laws. So the real problem is not between faith and reason. The real problem is between naturalism, materialism, and reason. To go into more depth on this, I recommend C.S. Lewis's book, Miracles. Also, there's been another follow-up that's been done and refined. The argument's been refined by others. Another book is called C.S. Lewis's Dangerous Idea. So, and also one more I'll mention is Alvin Plantinga's book, and he discusses how is it, if naturalism were true, how is it even possible that we can have confidence in our cognitive faculties, because they don't aim at truth, they aim at survival on a naturalistic worldview. So the real problem here is not between reason and faith, but rather how does reason even work on a naturalistic framework?
It just fail. And so the track record is so poor that going forward, I have essentially zero confidence, near zero confidence that there will be fruitful things to emerge from the effort to reconcile it. So, for example, if you knew nothing about science and you read, say, the Bible, the Old Testament, which in Genesis is an account of nature, that's what that is. And I said to you, give me your description of the natural world based only on this. You would say the world was created in 6 days and that stars are just little points of light, much lesser than the sun. And in fact, they can fall out of the sky, right? Because that's what happens during the Revelation. One of the signs that the second coming is that the stars will fall out of the sky and land on Earth. So to even write that means you don't know what those things are.
Okay, so let me jump in right here. So I think it's very interesting that he's going to Revelation, the book of Revelation. He's actually commenting out of Revelation chapter 6, and it talks about a sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell into the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind. So Revelation chapter 6 describes these cosmic signs, great earthquake, sun becoming black, moon becomes as blood, stars from heaven fall. So what Christians are interested in, those of us conservative Christians who hold to biblical inerrancy, is not what the biblical writers might have had as far as personal beliefs. What we're concerned about is scriptural claims. Now, it's patently obvious that anyone living in the first century probably didn't have the same sort of scientific understandings that we have now. What they thought about the stars, or what they thought about some of nature's wonders, is interesting to us, but what we're concerned about in order to maintain biblical inerrancy is the kinds of claims that they're making. Now, it's interesting that he jumps to the book of Revelation. Is the book of Revelation making a claim that stars are literally going to fall to the earth? That's the interesting question when it comes to biblical inerrancy, if the Bible's to be faithfully interpreted. So we'll get into this a little more, but let's follow along with the rest of what he has to say here.
You have no concept of what the actual universe is. So everybody who tried to make proclamations about the physical universe based on Bible passages got the wrong answer. So what happened was, when science discovers things and you want to stay religious, or you want to continue to believe that the Bible is unerring, what you would do is you would say, well, let me go back to the Bible and reinterpret it. Then you'd say things like, oh, they didn't really mean that literally, they meant that figuratively. So this whole sort of reinterpretation of how figurative the poetic passages of the Bible are came after science showed that this is not how things unfolded.
Okay, so here's the problem, is that's not what's happened. He's given us an example from Revelation chapter 6. This is not what happened. You go back, the earliest commentary that I could find on the book of Revelation goes back to the mid-200s. And if you go and you look at that commentary, they are not interpreting, the writer Victorinus is not interpreting Revelation chapter 6. He's not interpreting it literally. I don't necessarily agree with his interpretation, but he already in the 200s, the earliest records that we have, before the scientific revolution, they are not taking it literally. So what he's saying here is just not true. People in the earliest days were not reading Revelation chapter 6 and stars falling from heaven as a literal account of the stars. He's sort of slandering the historical record. Now, I want to hasten to say, I don't think that he's probably doing this on purpose. I want to maintain his integrity. But I think it's an indictment on what's happening in our education system. So you have a man like Neil deGrasse Tyson, brilliant scientist, smart guy, very articulate. He's fun to listen to. And yet, he doesn't understand. He's used an example from Revelation chapter 6. That's the last reference that we've had from him. And he's saying that, what happened is science learned what those stars really were, and so people went back and they reinterpreted the Bible to make it seem like it's not claiming that that's literally going to happen. But the historical record doesn't bear that out. Christians were not reading, not universally at least, were not reading that as a literal account. In fact, you can go to Isaiah, and some of this cosmic language is used to describe the fall of nations. So I think it speaks to the fact that we are educating people in a very good way in terms of mathematics and science, and they have a good grasp of that. But what they're missing is some of the classical education that people used to have in order to fit in society. If you look at the writings of our founding fathers, I'm going to admit to you right off the bat that some of those people were not real solid conservative Christians. Thomas Jefferson had some views that were, I think, outside the realm of conservative Christianity. However, if you read his writings, his grasps and understanding of the scriptures and the history of Christian thought were profound. He was a great a polymath of his day, a scientist and a philosopher, but he was also a biblical scholar. And one of the greatest critics of Christianity now, the most famous one, is Richard Dawkins. He was asked, have you read your Bible all the way from cover to cover? Richard Dawkins said, I haven't. Here you have an Oxford-trained scientist. Think about this. One of the greatest institutions and one of the greatest educational institutions, and one of the most outspoken critics of Christianity, was able to graduate from that institution and never read. Okay, I believe this is inspired. I think it's inerrant. But regardless of what you think about my views on that, the thing about this is it's the most influential book of all time that has shaped Western civilization. And at the time of that interview, Richard Dawkins hadn't read it through, and yet he wants to be an outspoken critic of the Bible and Christianity. So if you're going to go public and become the greatest spokesman for the other side, it would be good if you took some time to understand where we're coming from. And that's really all I'm asking for. I don't think some of these men who have a great grasp on science and other fields have really taken the time to understand Christian theology and where we're coming from. And so I think they do a disservice when they speak publicly, authoritatively, like they really know what they're talking about on these subjects. Now, I'm not saying I'm smarter than Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm not. I'm just an average guy, just an ordinary guy. But at least it appears that he doesn't have a very good grasp on how some of these texts have been interpreted in the past. And so I understand that. That's fine. But don't slander the faith that you don't understand.